when you compare the Anglo countries, United States and the UK and then Europe, it does seem that there is a delay in Europe. Why is that delay?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I want to insist on it. I don't think there's a delay, and I don't think at all that the facts in the European Union at 27 we decided to go together has been delaying in any manner the process of vaccination. Then we have different stories, different debates in all our national countries, member states, sometimes at regional level about how we organize, maybe sometimes we can speed up, adjust and so on. And I think every single country has this issue. I think we should not mix up the two issues. Having set an EU framework for France, for Germany, for all the 27 member states has been extremely important, and I insist very successful as well. Why? Because I think this is the best way to combine full security. We have one common single agency, the European Medicine Agency, which is extremely professional, extremely secure, and they are assessing the medicine, the vaccine in this case, for everyone, every single member state. Just imagine 1 second if France had approved one vaccine and not Germany or vice versa. I think because we are very close, very integrated, the debate would have been terrible all across the continent. So I think it was very good to go together. I think it's not been slow. If you look at the contracts, the EU has been negotiating since the beginning of the summer under an initiative or pressure from France, Germany, and a few other countries. And they have a contract, we have a contract at the EU level with 6 laboratories, with 6 big companies and 6 vaccines, and maybe there will be extra one. And we see that we can adjust very fast. BioNTech, Pfizer, a few months ago, it was not that clear that it would be the first vaccine to be available. And since we know it is now, it's been approved also by our agency at the European level, we are increasing the number of doses. We have doubled the number of doses we have secured in a contract with them last week. So I think we are reactive, I think we are flexible, I think we are able to accelerate when needed. And we also have to look at the situation from a global point of view. There are, that's true, different models of vaccine strategy. In the US or in Israel, for instance, even in the UK, if we compare more closely to what happens in Europe, sometimes it's getting quicker. Maybe we can adjust to this. But I think they have also made different choices, sometimes not giving free access to everyone. If you go to Israel, to the US, it's not the same ability to access for vulnerable people and so on to the vaccine. We have our European model, which I'm proud of. We are securing free access to the vaccine to everyone. So sometimes it takes a bit more time to organize. We have very secure processes. And when you look at what happened with AstraZeneca in the UK, they are a bit in advance, but maybe we will have a decision by the EMA in a few weeks only. But they also decided to adapt the protocol, which I think in the EU would have created a lot of criticism. So I think we can always improve, but I think we combine security, health security, common processes, sometimes cheap buying of the vaccine. We are not sacrificing health in any manner, but it's better to buy together, and access to all the vaccines, which is also very important, because, as I say, no country, no EU country in this case, will be able to vaccinate its whole population with only 1 or 2 vaccines. It's not possible when you look at the mass, at the numbers. So it's also very important that we have these different contracts, and the only way to have them was to do it at the EU level.
Right, you make a good point that doing it as a group, it also brings the price down, which then reflects to the consumer, which is also a very fair point.
I mean, of course, the priority is not to buy cheap. The priority is to buy quickly and to buy enough doses and to buy a good vaccine with full security. That's our clear priority. But if you can have an advantage in the discussion with big laboratories, which is a trade, the commercial negotiation, well, I think you have also to defend the interest of Europeans in terms of budget.
And I wonder, now that you mentioned the different labs, you know very well there's been stories that have been published, perhaps suggesting that there has been issues with the distribution because your country in particular was blocking perhaps a certain vaccine, that they were trying to get a big contract for Sanofi. Is there any truth in that? Did you try to intervene in any way?
No, we didn't block any vaccine, and we did not have any nationalistic approach in terms of putting the emphasis on our laboratory, which I want also to say is not true, because Sanofi, sometimes when you look at the press coverage, you have the feeling that Sanofi is a kind of state-owned company. It's not a French-owned company by government or public authorities at all. It has a majority actually of non-French shareholders as well. So even this story of the French Sanofi lab should be a bit nuanced. But in substance, we have made collective choices at the EU level. As I said, we have chosen, and I think it's the right approach, to have a diversity, a broad range of vaccines. And we have not excluded, for instance, a German lab in this case. CureVac is German. We have secured a big contract with CureVac. BioNTech in the BioNTech-Pfizer alliance is German and very successful, fine. We increased the number of orders with BioNTech. So I think this idea of a preference of a kind of controversy linked to the fact that France would have given advantage to its laboratory is just untrue. It's very nasty spin. But facts are not confirming in any manner the situation, and the Commission, the European Commission, has been also extremely transparent and clear about this.
Right, and you flat out deny that there was never anyone in the health ministry that called the Commission to say, I want you to look at my vaccine before the German. That never happened.
Frankly, I'm not aware at all of any kind of this intervention. And when you look at the results and the facts, we have Sanofi included in the European portfolio, which I think is good. Now there are some delays, which we France, Germany, all countries were not able to guess or to find about before. We didn't know. But it's still very important to have Sanofi in, but with other companies as well. And BioNTech is in, CureVac is in, AstraZeneca is in, and so on and so forth. So we need, it's totally absurd and I think counterproductive to oppose one nationality against another, one pharma against another one. We need this group of vaccines and this group of laboratories in our vaccine portfolio.
Right, and now let's talk about Brexit. I know you look at that almost on a daily basis. We had the deal, it still needs to be ratified, but that scenario of real chaos, that didn't actually happen and hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of commentators and also politicians in the UK, quite frankly, that look at this and say, you see, nothing happened, it's all under control, the worst is over. Would you say when it comes to Brexit, the worst is over?
Don't think so. I think we avoided the worst case scenario, especially for the UK, but it would have been a bad scenario for the EU as well, frankly, which was no deal. And that's why we negotiated hard, we worked hard in a cooperative manner, even if it was sometimes tensed, between the UK and the EU to find a deal and a good deal. Of course, if you had no deal, the kind of bad negative consequences of this whole thing would have been much more important and much more visible, but that was not the goal, to find or to create chaos, of course. That said, I think it can go also the other way around. When you look at some, I think, crazy promises, sometimes lies, made by hard Brexiteers saying it will be entirely different, look, you will have sovereignty, your fish, you take back control, your waters, you take back control, and so on. Day one, it will be a very different world with a lot of upsides and so on. It did not materialize. So I think it also says something about the need for cooperation. The best case scenario, I think it's a good demonstration, is to cooperate. When you look at students benefiting from the Erasmus exchange program, they will not be able to benefit in the UK anymore because the UK decided, free choice, to get out of this European program, which I do regret. And I think you will have consequences materializing over time. I think the impact on UK growth, investment, maybe attractiveness, to be clear, I'm not expecting this or looking for this, but I think it will happen. And when you look, we'll see economic forecasts, analysis and so on, it's quite clear that this is not good news. And when you also look at border checks, border controls and so on, which are the inevitable consequence of Brexit, you already see that it creates for sometimes smaller companies exporting to the other markets some difficulties, red tape and so on, which means also that there is value in having the same market. And just final point, I want to insist that the UK has secured in this deal access to the EU markets, which we were ready to provide for, but respecting in many respects our rules and our standards, which limits their ability to be fully sovereign, but that's the balance that shows. And I think in a way, it's not the greatest situation because they will have access to the markets, but they will not decide on the rules of these big EU markets. So I think it's much better, and we should demonstrate it, insist on it, to be within the club and to be able to decide on these rules.
And there's one area that the UK did not get a deal yet, and that's the financial services. That's the passport, and that's the equivalence. That is huge because, I mean, the City of London depends on that, and we have seen some banks recently, Goldman Sachs, moving to Paris for that same reason. There's a lot of uncertainty. And the Prime Minister, he says, we don't have everything we want, but that doesn't mean we can't get it in the future, and perhaps we get it in the future. Do you think that's going to happen in 2-3 years' time? The EU is going to grant full equivalence just like that?
No, passporting is over. That's, you were mentioning the consequences of Brexit. That's a clear-cut consequence of Brexit. So no passporting anymore. And there's no way there can be a passporting when you're out of the EU. That's not possible in our legal framework. What is possible, but it's a unilateral decision from the EU to be decided by us 27, is to give equivalence, so possible access to our financial services markets on an ad hoc basis, meaning that you look at the segment of the market you want to give access to, you decide yourself, EU in this case, and you can also revoke this authorization of access. So it's a very, very different world from the one we were living in before 31st of December. So it's very clear that passporting is over. There's no parallel negotiation in financial services. The deal is done. And on this, there is a unilateral framework of equivalence in the hands of the EU. And now we will be looking, it's our analysis to be done, at the financial regulations of the UK markets to see whether we think they are protective enough, regulated enough, to give, again, on an ad hoc unilateral basis, access or not to our market.
And, the equivalence is key, and maybe the Prime Minister is getting ahead of himself by saying, we could get it in 1 or 2 years. No one has said no. But I wonder, when you look at your capacity to attract money and investment money, do you think that in the future, a city like Paris, which is your country, could be able to rival London?
I think there will clearly be a competitive advantage for EU financial places, not only Paris. Also, of course, as a French minister, I'm fighting hard with the governments to make Paris an attractive financial place, and we have gained, as you mentioned, a few thousands already of jobs coming from London. I think, for instance, in green financing, we have a very good competitive advantage, but other places as well, Frankfurt in Germany, Dublin, Amsterdam, are also competing hard to be very attractive places and to take some advantage of the new situation. So I think we should not compete too much against each other within the EU, so we should maybe organize some specializations and so on a market basis. But I'm totally sure that it will not kill the city, which will remain a big financial place, I think. But it will be probably very damaging for the city, and I looked at the debate in the British Parliament when the deal was presented by the British government, and former Prime Minister Theresa May, who knows her stuff about this, said this is a big problem for the UK, not to have focused on financial services in this negotiation. That was a choice to be made, but for sure, passporting, meaning overall access across the board, defined forever, is not possible anymore in this new reality.
And you're very clear on that. That's a no. And in terms of some of the news that we're seeing today, perhaps it's slightly outside of your remit, but nonetheless, it's making big headlines today. It has to do with social media, Twitter. We know that President Trump has been removed. We know what happened last week in the scenes in the Capitol, which were, I guess we can agree, very shocking. What is your take on that? I know that today Bruno Le Maire, your colleague, was saying, I'm not so much shocked by the fact that he's been removed, but I'm shocked that this is a decision from a CEO. It's not a court, it's not a politician that's saying this. Is that something that you share?
Yeah, I think we have to be clear on the personal feeling you can have towards Donald Trump and Donald Trump's comments. And in substance, I think having a regulation, potentially a closing of a Twitter account, even if it's a US president, should be possible. But yes, I'm shocked by the fact that it is now entirely in private hands. It cannot be in private hands only. So that's exactly why, at the EU level, the European Commission, Ms. Vestager, Mr. Breton, have proposed, and we support this approach, a public framework of regulation with the big platforms to say there are cases that we will define by law in which you have an obligation to withdraw content, sometimes to pay a fine, sometimes to close a Twitter, Instagram, or whatever account, and so on. This should be decided by citizens, actually, not by a CEO. You can think whatever you want about this CEO and this president. This is a different story. But the fact that this regulation is necessary, I think, is now emphasized by this episode. And the fact that this regulation should be public, organized by law, decided by citizens and parliaments, is now very clear. And that's what I'm fighting for with my government colleagues at the EU level, to have a public European regulation of big online platforms.
And your country's also been very vocal on the need to pay more tax. When you look at an Amazon, a Facebook, and so on, they need to pay more tax, and also they benefit from European data. Is that something that you're going to continue to work with the new administration, that they pay more?
Yes, certainly, and I think this debate as well has risen in the US. So it's not only a European debate. I think actually it's a global debate, and within OECD, for instance, there are some discussions on this. It's very clear that it's shocking that you can see huge digital players not paying taxes or very low levels of taxes in comparison with small SMEs or whatever, especially after this health crisis which has developed. The benefits, the revenues, the economic size of these big platforms. So yes, it's necessary to redefine our tax rules, to do it at the European or global level. That would be fairer and more effective. That's what we are fighting for. We will go on, because if you look at this whole story, accounts, tax levels, and so on, what does it mean? It means we need to invent a new legal framework based on citizens, parliaments, to regulate these new players, which are extremely dominant in our everyday's reality on all types of activities, consumption, politics, and so on. We need a public regulation.
And you mentioned the U.S. government. Joe Biden is going to be taking office if everything goes according to plan in just a few days. What do you want to work with the U.S. administration? What's the number one priority? And the reason why I ask you too about number one priority is because you just signed a deal with China, an investment deal, which to some in the U.S. that was shocking, especially in the week where the Hong Kong crackdown was happening, which is a very serious situation. How do you balance the two?
I think this particular agreement has many steps to go on with first, so it's not the end of the story. It should not be in isolation. It should be seen as a chapter in EU-China relations, which we should be much more and more demanding about, regarding human rights, regarding social rights, and so on. And yes, we are shocked by what is happening there. But I think what has happened is that the EU, over the last 3-4 years, to some extent, the Trump style has helped us go in this direction, is to be tougher, less naive with China, and to have our own tools as well. We should not be entirely dependent on what the US is doing with China, even a new administration. That said, it's one of the areas of priority, trade, the rules of international trade, including towards China, we should work on with the USA, with the new Biden administration. I think it's really top of the agenda, maybe the first topic we should focus on in the months to come.
And do you think the U.S. and when your American counterparts come to Europe, they're going to see a Europe that is much more, to some extent, strategically independent, that is not as perhaps as naive as you said, just willing to go the path that America sets out?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it is also it's also the U.S. interest. What we have done during the last 4 years, when Mr. Trump wanted to go out of the Paris Agreement to keep up the fight for climate, I think Mr. Biden, Ms. Harris will be happy about that, because they come to Europe with a partner which has fought for this fight, fought for climate. If you take the behavior towards trade or China, we have changed a lot. And sometimes, yes, the US behavior has triggered some European awareness about what's happening on the global stage in global trade. And yes, we have changed. I think for those who were part sometimes of the Obama administration, they will see a different EU, stronger, not hostile in any manner to the US, but yes, more ready to take responsibility. And I'm totally convinced, without being too naive, that it's deeply in the US interest over the long run.
And you mentioned trade. There were tariffs that were supposed to kick in when it comes to French luxury goods. That was suspended. Do you think this is the end to politics by tariffs, that we're not going to see that happening every 2 months?
I do hope so, because this is a killer, and this is nobody's interest. I think this kind of trade war, trade tension between the US and the EU is slowing down the partnership we should set up regarding international trade, WTO reform, China and so on, which should be probably the strongest link in the transatlantic partnership in the years to come.
Right.
So we need to decrease this tension and to start with a fresh start on this global agenda together.
And just a very final question, because I know you have to go, but there was a story that we found rather amusing, that perhaps some in the UK cabinet were unhappy about some of your tweets. Have you been told perhaps to tone it down in any way, or you just tweet as you deem fit?
No, I'm always thinking about my tweets, but they are not determined by foreign influence.